In previous videos, we've talked about tagging students and tagging questions. And the whole reason we're doing this is for the reports that can be run in Smart Response. So what we're going to focus on in this video are the different reports that can be run and what they actually mean. So what we're going to do is we're going to go into our teacher tools. And over on the left-hand side, you'll see that there's 4 different types of reports: student performance, student comparison, and class comparison. What we're going to do is we're going to start with student performance. And what we're going to do is we're going to look at assessment summary. What assessment summary can do, we'll see here in a second. What we have to do is go in the number 2 here. We're going to choose our class. So I'm going to choose just first period. Then students, I can go ahead and select any students I want, up to 20 students per report. So I'm just going to click on PT Cruiser here. I'm going to go ahead and hit OK. Then I want to look at the assessments. I can look at one assessment, or I can look at all the assessments. I can pick the assessments by date range. So if I want to look at the whole year, month, week, just a couple of days, I can do that. I can also decide by category. So we talked about in a previous video about setting assessments to test, quiz, practice, or a custom name you want. But I'm going to leave all assessments, and I'm going to go ahead and select all the different assessments here. I'm going to go ahead and hit OK. And what I can do here is set thresholds. So basically, this is everything. I want to look at all reports, all grades. But if for some reason I want to say maybe just look at the reports of kids failing or the data where there's failing, we can. We can also look at it as a pie chart and a line chart. I prefer bar chart. From here, we can export this out in an Excel document, create a PDF to save and give to an administrator or something of that nature. But what I'm going to do is I'm just going to preview it because we just want to look at the data. So I'm going to go ahead and hit preview. And what I see here is I see on the Chapter 1 test how PT Cruiser, that's everything in blue, compares to the class. So we can see in Chapter 1 test, PT Cruiser was above class average, was below class average on the Chapter 2 test. Then we had some practice tests, and PT Cruiser did better than the whole class did on each of those 3. So that's what the student performance report will show. How did, on a given assessment, did a student do compared to the class? Our next assessment is educational standards. This one is a key report. I'm going to click on educational standards. I'm going to stay with first period. I'm going to stay with PT Cruiser as my student. I'm going to stay with all assessment, but you'll notice educational standards now came up. So I'm going to go ahead and click on standards. It is now going to pull all the standards that I have assessed for these assessments. And what I want to do is, do I want to look at one individual standard or all of them that I tested on? I'm going to select all 4 so I can see everything that we tested on. I'm going to hit OK. And the same thing, thresholds, bar chart, line graph, and I'm going to preview again. And why this is such a powerful report is I am now seeing on this given standard, how is PT Cruiser doing compared to the class. And in all standards except for this standard here, PT Cruiser is above class average. Now, I'm going to sit here and say, okay, I don't know what that standard means. At the bottom of each one of these, we actually get the definition of what that standard is. So yet again, it's all on one sheet of paper, and I can see how is the student. So if I need to go into an IEP meeting, I need to talk to an administrator or a parent, especially parent-teacher conferences, and say, hey, how is PT Cruiser doing? This is one of those reports. So if I could say, I have to go, let's say we get called into an IEP meeting, and I see PT Cruisers down here on everything. We might need to look at some services. We might need to look at that. If this is maybe an ELL student, do we need additional services? That's what this report can really generate for you. Our next report is cognitive levels. Just like we talked about in a previous video, we can tag with not just educational standards, but cognitive levels. This is the same thing as what the educational standards report would look like. I can do question performance. This is one of those, I have a parent that comes in and says, I want to see how my student did on any given test or all the exams. Same thing, I'm going to stay with first period, stay with my PT Cruiser, all assessments, hit preview. And I'm now getting a breakout. how did PT Cruiser answer each individual question? How did they do? And this is the chapter 1 test. And here is each individual question for that. Okay. And then I can go down. Here's chapter 2 test. Here's one of the practice exams, practice quiz, and the other practice quiz. So I'm getting an actual breakout of how a student answered compared to the correct answer on what the question was. And lastly, we have performance summary. And same thing, we're going to keep all these parameters the same, and I'm going to preview. What this gives me is by subject breakout. So if I had multiple subjects in a given class, that we would see a breakout there. I believe, though, in creating a separate class for each subject matter. But then I can also see a line. Over time, how is this student doing? We can see here the student is in blue, class is in red. I can look at this and say, hey, something happened here with this last exam. And each dot I can hover and see how they did. We can see the class dipped on that last exam, but PT Cruiser dipped further than the average class student. So we might have to look at that. And then, yet again, we just have no topic because we have not broken out in that segment. So that is all the reports that we can generate for a student individually. And what we're going to do is let's just jump right to student comparison. You'll notice I still have the same. I have 4 of the 5. You'll notice I do not have performance summary. Performance summary does not show up in the comparison groups. So I can do, let's say, educational standards. I'm going to pick first period. And for students, I'm going to go back to Mr. PT Cruiser. And I want to compare him to Barney Cole. Okay, I'm going to hit OK. Check my assessments. Check them all. And then I got to pick my standards. So we'll go back to the 4 standards. I can do my thresholds, bar graph, line graph chart, hit preview. And I'm now seeing how is PT Cruiser compared to Barney Cole compared to the class average. Now, overall, I'm not 100% sure why you'd want to compare students. As an individual teacher, maybe in meetings, things of that nature, maybe we want to do the class individual students. It's data for you to mold your teaching, but this is not a report that I would be sharing with parents, stuff of that nature, because at all costs, we never want to compare a student to another student directly in front, like I said, to a parent or another student. But maybe we can get some data. Maybe we're looking at pairing some students up. Who's getting it, who's not. Maybe pair up some kids in that manner. This would be a report that you could do that for. Our next group here, we're going to look at class performance. We have a similar group here, just like with students. We have assessment, educational, cognitive levels, question, performance. So we'll start with the assessment summary. I'm going to stay with my first period class. I'm going to select all my assessments again. This is all still the same. And I'm going to go ahead and hit preview. Now we see as a class average. This is averaging everything together over time. Not, so it's comparing everything. We see on the chapter 1 test how the class did, chapter 2, and the 3 practice quizzes combined together. That's all this report is going to show you. It's just that, snapshot of class average per assessment. Educational standards. We're going to do everything we've done before. And I'm going to hit OK and hit preview. Now I'm seeing yet again a class average of how is the class doing on this standard. This is going to give me data. In this case, I can say, hey, the students are getting this. My lowest standard right here is an 86%. That's still at a good level. But let's hypothetically say this standard was way down here at the bottom. I know looking right at this report instantly, because this is a report that's ready the second I'm done with an assessment, I now say, hey, I have to reteach that skill. And I can say as a teacher, am I going to reteach it tomorrow? Because I cannot move on to the next topic without this. I can't do multiplication if I don't know addition. Or is it a skill maybe in like language arts where it's something, maybe we mastered main idea, but we're not getting topic sentence. Topic sentence can be taught again and reinforced in future lessons. So it might not be a reteach tomorrow, but it'll be a reteach next week. But this is data we're getting today instantly that we can move on and say, what standards do I have to go back and master? Cognitive levels, same as educational standards. Question performance, we're going to go ahead and preview this. This is just showing me how did the students do on this exam. So chapter 1 test, question 1, we have 14 kids passed. We have 1 that failed and 14 that, or 15 absent students. That's what this TAN is students who did not take the assessment. And I can look through and do this for each. So I can see real quick, how did the kids do? Maybe go back and say, hey, we did really good on this question, not so good on this question. Let's review, see why we didn't get that question right. And last, performance summary. I think yet again, this is one of the most important reports that can come out of Smart Response. We keep our periods, we keep our assessments. I'm going to go ahead and preview. We talked about the no subject, like I said, because I believe in keeping one subject per. We see the class over time. Important. Are we going up or are we going down? This can get a little tricky though, because we're not always teaching the same skill. So all because we dip down or go way up doesn't necessarily mean a good or a bad thing. But we can see we want to keep a solid line without too many dips either way. We're back to no topic. This is, we talked in a previous video about setting quizzes, tests. This is how the kids are doing. The students are doing slightly better on tests than quizzes, but that can be some data that we can really analyze, especially if there's a big gap here. Kids are doing really good on quizzes, but they're not quite getting tests. Something of that nature we want to look at. This is a class performance. This is how each kid's doing in average. So we can do that through our student performance report, but this is the whole class at one time. Gives us more than 20 students if needed. But this report right here, this is key. This gives us the ability to see, how are my ELL students doing? How are my IEP students doing? How are my females doing versus my males? Any of those tags that you put before, if they're an honor student, things of that nature, we can actually come in here and see. I can say from this report, my ELL students are doing really good. IEP, right there, kind of in the middle of the pack. This is an important skill. If we're looking in a class and we say, males, females in general are way up, non-IEP, you might want to say regular ed in those tags, whatever, to get that comparison. But if we see our IEP kids are way down here at the bottom, ELL's way down here at the bottom, we can go into a meeting and say, hey, we need additional support in this classroom. The same idea, if you have a teacher saying things just aren't going good, special ed kids aren't doing great, EL's not doing great, but I can pull this report and say they're doing just as good as everybody else in the class. We know we're having success. We know having that one-on-one aid or that group aid in that class is right on target. That's what this report can give you. Another example of this report, I am going to switch this over to period 2 to show you another example of what we talked about in the previous video about tagging. Everything's still the same as we saw in the last report. We come down here to ELL, female, IEP, male, still the same. But now, if you remember from a previous video, we talked about that difference between a colon and a semicolon. We come down here, here's my RTI. What I did was I did my semicolon, RTI, colon, green, red, yellow for different students in my period 2. I can now come into this report and say, how are my green kids doing compared to my red, compared to my yellow? Now, this report is not exactly showing the trend of what RTI should be. Green should be up here, yellow around here, red down here. The 80-60 or 80-60-20, roughly. And then what we want to do, but with this report, I can see how are they doing. If I did feeder schools, if I did different types of groups, I can see how's one group doing to the other in its own report. And that was the big difference between the colon and the semicolon. So those are our reports, and then we can do class comparison. This is big, especially as we know as teachers that from period to period we teach a little different, but is that affecting assessments? So what I can do is assessment summary, pick my classes to compare. In this case, I'm going to pick all. I'm going to pick my assessments, and then hit preview. And now I can see on the chapter 1 test, period 1 far did better than period 2. Maybe we need to look at that. Maybe something happened between those periods. What was it? Do we have a lot of assemblies, a lot of kids out? Is it just the way I taught? Things of that nature. Chapter 2, we see second period did better, things of that nature. In our practice quizzes, we all were about equal, so that's good. That's kind of what we want to see. If we're comparing apples to apples across the board, teaching that same subject, same topic each day, we want to see a rough equal there. We come down, we do educational standards, just the same as before, nothing new. Our only difference, we're seeing how did the class do. This is actually a good representation of really what you want to see from class to class. You want to see on a given standard that we're scoring about the same. We always want to get as close to 100 as possible, but if we see one class is going way above and beyond another, we know maybe something was done differently in instruction or something's done differently in those periods to look at deeper. But as we can see here, period 1 compared to period 2, class average for this standard. We see our biggest deviation here. Maybe that's something to look at. Cognitive levels the same way. Question performance, same as before. How did we do on each question? Question 1, period 1 did really good on this question. Period 2, not so good. And we can go down the chart and look at that through each test and the different quizzes. So that's our reports for Smart Response. Like I said, they can give you some very valuable data in terms of how are students doing all the way down to the standard. And that's key for student growth and teaching, and the way you're going to mold your teaching is how is that student doing, how is that class doing by standard, as far down as cognitive levels, and that small group. How are my RTI kids doing? How is ELL? How is IEP? We got to hit those core targets and see, are they struggling or are they performing on target with everybody else? And that helps us mold, have those great data discussions with administration, with teams, with coaches, and make decisions for students and see what's best for students. And this is really the key of what Smart Response can do for you. Thank you.